Welcome back, and now the news in detail. New Delhi's communication blackout and security clampdown in the occupied Kashmir have been challenged in the Indian Supreme Court. An activist of the opposition Congress has filed a petition in the country's top court as India's crushing lockdown enters its fourth day. Life in the valley has been paralyzed with ban on all communication channels, including landlines, mobile networks and internet. Over 800,000 Indian troops have arrested more than 500 Kashmiris over the past 4 days. There are reports of multiple martyrdoms as occupying troops snub protests rejecting India's illegal accession of the valley. Chinese Ambassador Yao Jing has said Beijing opposes India's unilateral change in the status of occupied Kashmir. Talking to media in Islamabad, Jing said New Delhi must respect UN resolutions and international norms concerning Kashmir. The Chinese envoy hoped Pakistan and India will act responsibly for the sake of peace and people of Kashmir. The statement comes after India illegally stripped the occupied valley of its special status after scrapping Article 370. Pakistan has asked India to recall its High Commissioner after New Delhi illegally revoked the special status of Indian-occupied Kashmir. The Foreign Office says Pakistan will not send its High Commissioner to India. The decision was made at the second National Security Committee meeting chaired by Prime Minister Imran Khan. It was also decided that Pakistan will cut trade ties with India. During the meeting, the top civil and military leadership also decided to raise the issue at the United Nations Security Council. Pakistan will observe its Independence Day on August the 14th in solidarity with Kashmiris. 15th of August, which is India's Independence Day, will be observed as a Black Day. Earlier, the Prime Minister discussed illegal accession of occupied Kashmir with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson over the phone. U.S. immigration officials have arrested 680 undocumented migrant workers in the southern state of Mississippi. The raids on meat processing plants are the largest workplace stings in a decade. Meanwhile, the U.S.'s top diplomat for Latin America, Kimberly Brea, resigned amid internal disputes over immigration policy. About 600 U.S. immigration and customs enforcement agents fanned out across plants operated by 5 companies. ICE officials say the raids were planned months ago. They say employers could be charged with knowingly hiding illegal citizens and scrutinized for tax, document, and wage fraud. The raids came just hours before Trump's visit to El Paso, Texas, a Latino majority border city where 22 people were killed over the weekend. The Venezuelan government has abandoned talks with the opposition in protest against fresh U.S. sanctions. The Information Ministry says President Nicolas Maduro has ordered his officials not to travel to Barbados for talks starting today. The ministry says the decision was made due to the grave and brutal aggression being continuously carried out by Washington. It says opposition leader Juan Guaido celebrated and promoted actions harmful to the national sovereignty. This comes after President Donald Trump seized all Venezuelan government assets in the U.S. Washington also threatened it would impose sanctions on any American doing business with Caracas. 3 people have been killed and 10 injured in Yemen during clashes between Presidential Guard forces and UAE-backed separatists in Aden. The violence highlights a rift within the Saudi-UAE-led coalition battling the Houthi rebel movement since 2015. The coalition and the government of President Abd Mansour Hadi are united against the Houthis but have rival agendas for Yemen's future. The United Nations has called for de-escalation after a surge in violence in the port city. Meanwhile, discussing regional challenges in the Middle East, U.S. Secretary Mike Pompeo thanked Saudi Arabia for its support in Yemen. United Nations Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, has expressed alarm over the escalation in Aden. In a tweet, he said the violence will contribute to instability and suffering in the southern port city. Griffiths has called on the parties involved in the conflict to abandon violence and engage in dialogue to resolve differences. He also urged authorities to de-escalate the situation and ensure civilian safety. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has discussed maritime security and Iran with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The U.S. State Department says both discussed stronger maritime security for freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf. The statement also said Iran's destabilizing activities were also discussed among other bilateral and regional issues. This comes amid heightened tensions in Persian Gulf over 2015 nuclear deal and oil tanker seizures by Iran and Britain. Now we talk about Syria. Washington and Ankara have agreed to set up a joint operations center in Turkey to manage a planned safe zone in northern Syria. After 3 days of talks in Ankara, the two countries said the safe zone will be a peace corridor. The agreement was announced by Turkey's defense ministry and the U.S. embassy in Ankara. Speaking in Ankara, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Turkey has made preparations to launch an operation but wants to act with the U.S. Turkey and the U.S. have been deadlocked for months over the scope and command of the safe zone. The U.S. says it will keep Sudan on its list of countries that sponsor terrorism. The U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs, David Hale, visited Khartoum and met with the military and civilian leadership. Hale says the U.S. needs to resolve long-standing issues with the country before it can consider removing it from the list. Hale pledged Washington's commitment to peace and security in the country.
The fact is that Sudan remains designated as a state sponsor. That remains in effect. There are a number of things we're looking forward to engaging in a civilian-led government. The issues that before us include the promotion of human rights and religious freedom, counterterrorism efforts.
The designation as a state sponsor of terrorism makes Sudan ineligible for debt relief from international lenders like IMF and the World Bank. Now moving on to Turkey, where the President Tayyip Erdogan says Turkey will never accept Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. Erdogan said the protection of Crimea's identity and preservation of its basic rights and freedoms are Turkey's priorities. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky held a press conference with Erdogan after their meeting in Ankara. Zelensky said Crimea belongs to Ukraine and international law must be respected. He said Kiev and Moscow will find a common path to re-establish peace and stability in the region. Zelensky is on a 2-day official visit to Ankara to discuss a business forum and improve bilateral relations. Moreover, 3 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants have been killed in Turkey's Hakkari province in a government forces airstrike. The National Defense Ministry says the operation was carried out to target assets of the separatist group. The ministry says the air raids destroyed a weapons cache and shelters used by the PKK. It says Turkey will continue to target weapons and shelters used by the terrorists. Ankara labels the PKK a terrorist group, holding it responsible for 40,000 killings, including women and children. The Italian Senate has rejected a motion by one of the ruling coalition parties to block an Alpine rail link with France. The upper house of the parliament has vetoed the Five-Star Movement's motion by 181 votes to 110. The party says cutting a 58-kilometer tunnel through the Alps will hurt the environment. It says the government should use the money to upgrade Italy's existing transport network. The rail link will connect the Italian city of Turin with Lyon in France. As the world marks 400 years since the first recorded African slaves arrived in North America, slavery remains a modern-age scourge. It is estimated that 40 million people are trapped in slavery, and much of it is concentrated in Africa. More in this report.
It's been 400 years since the first African slaves arrived in North America. The transatlantic slave trade was abolished in the 19th century. But in modern times, West Africa may be the world's slavery hub.
You tell me that my mother is coming, that I should not tell her what is happening to me, that I'm not even going to say anything, that she will not allow me to say anything. She will only allow me to greet her, tell her all these things. That if she asks me that how am I doing, I should say that I'm doing fine.
Blessing's story is all too common in Nigeria. She was sold off as a housemaid at 6 years old. According to the International Labour Organization, 7 out of every 1,000 Africans are trapped in some form of slavery. Trafficking of sex workers is the most widespread.
I feel like I paid the ultimate price for my family. So I came back. Now, my other sister is now working in Abuja. My younger sister is now a graduate. For me, I'm a dropout.
In 2015, the UN agreed to eradicate slavery as part of its 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. But according to researchers, this would be near possible at the current rate of enslavement, as it would require freeing 10,000 people every single day.
We'll add some more stories from around the globe in the bulletin, but right after a short break, stay tuned with Indus. Welcome back. The United Nations World Food Programme says more than 2 million Zimbabweans are on the verge of starvation. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has declared the drought in the southern African country a national disaster. The UN Food Agency has launched a $331 million aid appeal to help Zimbabwe recover from the drought. Executive Director of the WFP, David Beasley, says the number will increase to 5.5 million by March next year. Speaking at a joint appeal with the Zimbabwean government in Harare, Beasley said the country needs food aid urgently. He said the impact of the drought has spread. One of the largest threats to the environment is single-use plastic. 300 million tons of it is produced every year, while up to 13% is recycled. Now, one Mexican researcher has proposed a surprising solution to the problem: the prickly pear cactus. More in this report.
Humanity's addiction of disposable plastic can be seen anywhere on Earth. The stuff can be found everywhere, even the Mariana Trench. Without a biodegradable alternative, the situation will get worse. However, Mexican researcher Sandra Pasco may have found just what the world needs.
The idea came from students to start with this production of biodegradable plastic from prickly pear cactus. From there, the idea developed, and we, that group of students and I, started working on it.
Pasco's new packaging material is made from cactus pulp, which is biodegradable and non-toxic.
We are in the application tests. If the tests are favorable, there could be a transfer of technology in the future to begin with its mass production.
Pasco's creation will get the chance to prove itself next year, when Mexico's Jalisco state bans disposable plastics. But the researcher says the cactus packaging will not be enough to stop plastic pollution.
Both the companies, with the selling of their products, and the consumers, we make this exaggerated use of resources. Because we go to the store and you buy anything and they ask you, would you like a bag? In fact, the product you buy already has the primary packaging, sometimes even up to a tertiary one.
UN member states made a commitment to reduce production of single-use plastics last year, but environmentalists warn their goals will fall short of tackling the planet's pollution crisis, as over 8 million tons of plastic enter the world's oceans every year.
And now business updates. China has reported better than expected rise in exports despite mounting economic pressure from the elevated US tariffs. China's customs data shows exports have risen 3.3% in July. Imports have fallen about 5.5% during the same period. The country's overall trade surplus last month was about $45 billion. Meanwhile, from January to July, China's trade surplus with the US totaled over $168 billion. Pakistan and Afghanistan have agreed to boost bilateral trade by opening a preferential trade agreement. This comes after a meeting between the Prime Minister's Commerce Advisor Abdul Razzaq and Afghan envoy to Pakistan Shukrullah Mashal. Razzaq says both the sides will share their initial list of tariff lines next month, followed by technical committee meetings. The two sides discussed reopening border crossing points, including Torkham and Ghulam Khan. The ministry says the PM's advisor will visit Kabul this month to finalize the understanding on different trade and economic issues. Britain's new Prime Minister Boris Johnson has sent Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab to Washington to fast-track a post-Brexit trade deal with the US. He said Britain wants to reach a free trade deal with the United States. In a press talk with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Foreign Secretary Raab said Britain will manage the post-Brexit risks. Earlier, in a meeting with the US President Donald Trump, Raab said UK looks forward to working with its American friends. Last year, the United States ran a $20 billion trade surplus with Britain, making the UK America's fifth largest export market. The second Turkish ship, Yavuz, has begun gas drilling in the eastern Mediterranean. This comes as Ankara announced a third vessel will join the exploratory fleet by the end of August. Turkey's Energy Minister Fatih Dönmez says the ship began operations in an area of the Karpas Peninsula. Speaking on board one of the vessels, he hoped exploration will uncover gas reservoirs in next 3 months. This follows the imposition of sanctions on Turkey by the European Union last month. Cyprus and Turkey have long disputed ownership of offshore oil and gas reserves in the eastern Mediterranean. Ankara says Turkish Cypriots are entitled to a share of the resources. Asian stock markets are up across board after better than expected Chinese export numbers for July. Investors were also encouraged by the Chinese central bank's moves to limit the fall of the yuan. The Shanghai Composite is trading 1% higher after Chinese exports rose by 3.3% year-on-year in July. Japan's Nikkei 225, the Hang Seng in Hong Kong, and Australia's ASX 200 have all gained more than 0.5%. The Kospi is 1.25% higher after Japan approved the export of goods affected by its withdrawal of South Korea's preferential trade status. At the Pan American Games in Peru, America's Daniel Carr has won gold in the men's 200-meter backstroke swimming final. Carr's fellow countryman Nicholas Alexander claimed silver, while Brazil's Leonardo Gomes de Deus took the bronze. Carr darted to victory in 1 minute and 58.13 seconds. Alexander could only manage a silver, missing the top spot with a narrow margin of 0.17 seconds. De Deus claimed the third spot on the podium, finishing 0.6 seconds behind Carr. Meanwhile, in the men's football, Argentina have qualified for the finals after beating Uruguay by 3-0. Argentina striker Rodolfo Gaish scored twice to take his side to victory. The 2019 World Paragliding Championship has begun in Krashevo, North Macedonia. The competition will last till August the 17th. 150 pilots from 48 nations will battle it out in the skies for the title. Medals will be awarded in the overall women's and nations categories. Each national team can have a maximum of 5 pilots. Pilots will fly a preset cross-country course of up to 200 kilometers. They must tag turn points as they fly, and the fastest pilot around the course wins the day. The pilot with the most accumulated points at the end wins the overall competition. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.